right, everybody, welcome to the fifth episode of Penciled in Sports. My name is Jacob Pincel. I'm here with Chuck Swirsky, the radio play-by-play announcer and voice of the Chicago Bulls, my hometown team. Chuck, we're very excited to have you. How are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Really appreciate you taking the time. And before we hop in, I just want to ask, season's coming back, hopefully in a couple of months. What are your thoughts on how the NBA bubble went down? Very nice that we were able to see a champion crowned, no COVID, of course, but how did you observe that whole scenario?
Well, you're right. I mean, as a fan, and I am a fan, and of course the Bulls were not in the bubble, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. I mean, I caught probably like close to 100% of all the content on the networks and even NBA League Pass for teams that were trying to vie for a playoff berth. But the bottom line is, I thought the NBA, and again, it's everything starts at the top with the commissioner of the NBA, Adam Silver, and I think the commissioner did a fantastic job. I think it was well run. I mean, I know the players busted their tail and they put on an excellent product. So overall, thumbs up.
Yeah, I certainly agree. And it was really nice to actually see how, and I know a lot of reporters were talking about this as well, with less travel, you saw a heavy load of defensive intensity, although the scoring was definitely at a nice clip at the start of the bubble. And then I think actually the defense kind of caught up, but it definitely changed the game a little around. And I'm really interested to see how that plays into the future of the league with just some insights that they could have gained from less travel and kind of the timing between games.
Well, you know what's interesting, this is a good question, because, you know, Miami, and we talk about Jimmy Butler a lot, and of course we had Jimmy as a rookie in Chicago. So I knew his mindset, and I knew he gets after it, period. I mean, I love the guy. But Miami had a very young team. If you really think about it, they had a lot of guys. This was their baptism into the NBA playoffs. And I was thinking about this, you know, they didn't have to go on the road. They didn't have to play on opposing courts, as we mentioned, and feel that pressure about big stage, big lights, everything is much bigger. And they got in their comfort zone and played very, very well. And I think if any team was built for a bubble, it was Miami. And so it really didn't surprise me to see them reach the finals. Having said all that, I think the experience of all those teams in the bubble will bear fruit in the 2021 campaign. And so, I mean, I took a lot out of the bubble experience for a lot of teams, and I think Miami is a prime example.
I couldn't agree more. I think with Jimmy, he's a killer. He'll perform anywhere. But when you see guys like Duncan Robinson performing extremely well, obviously Tyler Herro broke out. Those are players that definitely could have benefited from not really going on the road and really facing that raucous home crowd, as you know, gets thrown out there in the NBA. And we'll touch on that a little bit more later. But I just want to hear a little bit about your career path. I mean, it's obviously a grind to rise to the top of the profession as you have. So if you could speak a little on that and how you came to this point.
Well, I'll be brief, okay? Number one, I knew what I wanted to do when I was 5 years old. I broke my mother's broomstick, and I tried to hang it up from a light bulb, but I wasn't that tall, so I kind of faked it a little bit and used it as a microphone, you know? And I would pretend to do play-by-play of all the sports, but I really gravitated to basketball. My father passed away when I was in elementary school, and there was a high school basketball coach who lived down the block, and his son was a grade behind me in school. So we would go and watch his dad's team because his dad was the head basketball coach. We would watch his teams play. We'd get in the car and go to the University of Washington games. I grew up in Bellevue on the east side of Seattle. We would watch the Sonics. And so this was a huge opportunity for me to really love the game. And so little by little, I go off to school, I get an internship, and then I get my first really great opportunity to call major college basketball for DePaul in the 1980s. And that led to broadcasting, University of Michigan, go blue. I love my 4 years in Ann Arbor. Rob Pelinka, the GM of the Lakers, was my broadcast analyst on the Michigan Radio Network. And that led to the NBA with the Raptors. And here we are going on my 23rd season in the NBA. and the last 12, now 13 coming up with the Bulls.
It's quite the ride. And I'm sure seeing college basketball and then transitioning to the NBA, there's so many differences, but
Yeah.
hopefully you were there in those glory days. I know my father, being a Chicago guy, speaks about DePaul and those great teams back in the day. So is that when you were there or a
Oh,
little bit
yeah.
past
I
that?
mean, I saw it all. Mark Aguirre, Terry Cummings,
Exactly.
Rod Strickland, Dallas Comegys. I mean, Kevin Edwards, who played in the NBA. You can go right down the list of some unbelievable players for DePaul. And then at the University of Michigan, I came at the tail end of the Fab Five. And then we had the next wave of some great young players, including guys like Gerard Ward, Maceo Baston, Maurice Taylor, Robert Traylor, just an unbelievable collection of fantastic players before I went to the NBA.
So I know you spent some time with WGN, and you were the PA announcer for the Bulls kind of in your first stint. I did my research, and that was prior to MJ arriving.
Yeah.
So obviously there's a major difference when you're calling games with MJ and there's just that inherent fan base built in, and he's really changing the sport of basketball throughout the world as we know it. But like in your opinion and from your experience, what was the challenge like of keeping fans engaged and calling games where, you're not going to have everybody watching 48 minutes or listening to 48 minutes because Michael Jordan's on the floor?
Well, here's the story. I auditioned for the PA job, and it was pre-Michael Jordan. So I'm fired up. I don't care whether it's PA, play-by-play. I mean, I love my job, and I'll never complain about my job at all. They give me an assignment, I go 100%, like just bust it. It's called passion. So I'm doing the PA, and leading into the 84-85 season, my boss at WGN says, Chuck, you're doing DePaul, but you're doing PA for the Bulls. You got to pick one, okay? You just can't do both. And I said, well, I love doing public address for the Bulls. And he goes, but you also, are kind of doing everything with DePaul, and you have to make a choice. And of course, I stayed with play-by-play, and Jordan went on to become Jordan. But I never second guessed it, because now if you look at how things develop in a career, without the play-by-play for DePaul, I don't get the University of Michigan job. And without doing the University of Michigan, I don't get the Raptors job. And without the Raptors, I don't get the Bulls job. So there's a place and a reason for everything. And so that's how I kind of, built up the foundation of my broadcast tree, and with the branches and the limbs, and it all grows. And so, I think that, Michael Jordan, before Jordan was drafted by the Bulls, DePaul owned Chicago. I mean, just some of the players I told you about, whether it's Mark Aguirre, Terry Cummings. I mean, these were two major big-time college players. I mean, Aguirre went number one in the draft, Terry Cummings in the top three. And so we're looking at two of the finest college players ever turned out in Chicago. So, Jordan comes in 84, and everyone knows that once Jordan arrived, Jordan was Jordan. And so, I mean, I think basketball in the 80s, and then, Jordan took it to the next level when he got his first title in 91. And I just think that whole period of time with DePaul leading into Jordan was magnificent.
Chicago basketball, it's a great market. DePaul's been
and don't forget Loyola. Loyola had a great run under Alfred Hughes. Loyola went to the Sweet 16 and, gave Georgetown fits. So, I mean, Loyola, Gene Sullivan was a really good basketball coach. The rivalry back in the 80s and early 90s, but especially in the 80s with Loyola and DePaul, it was intense. And I mean, I'm talking about alumni hall, alumni gym on campus. Rosemont Horizon, of course, came in the early 80s, 1980. But I want to tell you what, that Loyola DePaul game, that was unbelievable.
You definitely do have those rivalries. And Illinois is getting up there. I think they're preseason ranked top 5. Loyola was back in the Final Four a couple of years ago. Hopefully Northwestern picks it up. I'm definitely a fan of Chris Collins, but Chicago's got that talent, and you could see that in the NBA as well.
One of the elements that I missed when I was doing college basketball is that DePaul and Illinois, they were entrenched in a manner. They went after the same players, especially in the Midwest, especially in Chicago. Recruiting was like brutal. I mean, because you've got 3 or 4, maybe 5 guys playing high school ball in Chicago that are first tier college basketball talents. And, DePaul's going after them. Illinois is going after them. And I don't care whether it was, Nick Anderson, whether it was Marcus Liberty, whether it was Kendall Gill, all these players. I mean, Walter Downing from Providence. I mean, it was crazy. Then on top of that, you had Marquette, and you had Dayton, and you had Notre Dame. And remember, DePaul was an independent before the Great Midwest Conference when they entered the conference with Marquette and Dayton, and they had St. Louis, and they had Memphis and Cincinnati. And that in itself was an unbelievable conference. I mean, I did Penny Hardaway's first college game in Memphis. DePaul went down there on a Friday night and actually won in overtime, beating Penny Hardaway in his first ever college game. But I mean, I just wish DePaul and Illinois could have gotten on the same page and played each other during the 1980s, early 90s period. I think it would have been great for the state. It would have been great for college basketball, but for whatever reason, and there's a lot of speculation, but for whatever reason, it never happened.
So just to transition a little, I mean, you mentioned your experience calling at Michigan. There's definitely a great fan base there. Not giving myself a slight brag, but that was post Fab Five era. I mean, the Fab Five changed college basketball as we know it in terms of player activism, player branding. They did the Black Sox, things along those lines. Could you just talk a little bit about the vibe in the program following those years? And then also just being a witness of college basketball, how did they really change the game to the point where it's at today, where players could be getting paid soon for their name, image, and likeness? Obviously a long time later, but it's all a result of stuff the Fab Five started.
Well, I mean, you would go into the M-Den and you'd see Chris Webber, you'd see number 4, you'd see number 5, you'd see number 25. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, you look at the Fab Five, they did change the landscape of college basketball without any question. We will never see that again over a period of time of 2 to 3 years. These kids will be one and done. And it wasn't popular back then to be one and done. They stayed for 2 years. In the case of Jawan and Jalen, they left after their 3rd year. But I'll say this, Steve Fisher was the right coach at the right time when he took over for Bill Frieder in '89, and they had that NCAA playoff run and then beat Seton Hall for the championship. And then the Fab Five comes in, and Steve Fisher had the right temperament to coach that ball club. And I was very fortunate to have Steve Fisher when I was at Michigan before the program kind of unraveled a little bit. And then Brian Ellerby took over for several years before, they made a coaching change. But I love Steve Fisher. I will never say one bad thing about him as a man or as a basketball coach. And I think the players really, really respected him.
So I know then after spending time in Detroit, you actually went on to Toronto, had time in your first NBA role. Can you tell me a little bit about the jump from calling college basketball to professional, and also being in a hockey first town in country like Canada? What was the fan base like of the Raptors? I mean, you called some absolutely great years and good teams.
Well, I did. I was very fortunate because my first year was Vince Carter's first year. Now, Tracy McGrady had arrived a year before, so I saw the maturation of T-Mac, and I could tell. I mean, to this day, I just wish Tracy had signed an extension, because I really would like to have seen McGrady and Carter play together for at least 5 to 7 years to see where we're going with this. And then after 5, 6 years, if they hit the wall and they just, couldn't, just get it done, so to speak, I could see one of the two moving on. But I just wish for that window that Tracy and Vince would have been on the floor together. As it turned out, they were on the floor, 2 years together, and that was it, because Tracy left as a free agent and signed with Orlando. Vince did stick around, of course, signed an extension with the Raptors before being traded to the Nets. But I'll tell you, players always say the biggest adjustment from college to the NBA, well, the amount of games, obviously, length of a season, that's one, but the speed of the game, it is so fast. And as a broadcaster, trust me when I say this, I did college basketball for 14 years, maybe 15, 16 years. And I can tell you, as a broadcaster, it's one thing to watch an NBA game, it's another to call an NBA game. And I really had to take my game from here, my broadcast skills from here to here. And it probably took me a good, maybe half a season in the NBA to get where I really, really felt comfortable. Because in college, the ball's being passed around the perimeter, and it was like, okay, you could make that mental adjustment, when to come up for air, when to pause, when to give a score break update. In the NBA, everything is boom, 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 boom. And yet I will say this, I love the NBA. And that's not to say I don't like college, but as a broadcaster, nothing beats the NBA.
As a fan, I would agree. The NBA is fantastic. And it is interesting because you see college games where, especially with a team like Michigan and in the Big Ten, the scores can be in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
And in today's NBA game with the 3-point ball, obviously, you have to pretty much put up 100 points to win a game. So
I agree with that. Absolutely. The thing is, in college, like if you were a team that maybe you're well coached, but you just don't have the personnel, well, the only way that team can stay in a game is, limit possessions. Because once you give up the ball, you're in trouble against a really skilled team. So if you are a below 500 club and you're going, especially on the road, to a top 3-4 team in that conference, the only way you really can win a game, unless that team is taking you for granted and they just took the night off, the only way you can really win that game is by slowing the pace down. And it's not the greatest basketball in the world, and I get it. If I'm a coach, I probably would do the same thing. But one day, I think these kids coming out of high school are so gifted that I think one day we're going to have a 24, maybe 27-second shot clock. I'd like to see it 24 to pattern the NBA game, even though they aren't as skilled as NBA players. But I think players can make that adjustment. I do think at times the college game is overcoached. I think there are a lot of coaches who micromanage. But as far as the skill of the sport and how great the NBA game is, it's tough to beat.
I certainly agree. And just shifting a little bit to like the business of basketball. You've been around the game for multiple decades. The Raptors are a team that has always been big, but they've blown up recently. And I just want to throw a stat at you that as of 2020, every NBA team was valued over $2 billion. If you go back 10 years ago, I don't think a team was valued over $1 billion. So I'm just curious, like being around the stadium and seeing how they've changed over time in terms of sponsorship, in terms of seating, and just, the atmosphere of the stadium in kind of the surrounding community. How has that really changed in your time in professional sports?
Well, number one, let's go back. Number one, David Stern was fabulous, and Adam Silver has picked up where David Stern left off. Both of these gentlemen are awesome, and one day Adam Silver will be in the Basketball Hall of Fame joining David Stern. Game has gone global so much, and it was a vision of David Stern, of course, with the Dream Team in '92, and a lot of fans gravitated worldwide about this Dream Team. They saw Michael Jordan, and they saw Larry Bird, and they saw Magic Johnson, they saw Charles Barkley, They saw Patrick Ewing. They saw Karl Malone. They saw John Stockton. They saw
Doesn't
Scottie
end.
Pippen. I mean, it was like Chris Mullin. I mean, on and on and on and on. And I'm thinking, wow. Well, guess what? There are people who watch the NBA game, whether it's in Brazil or Italy, whether you're watching ball in Greece or Slovenia. And, fans have just said, we're into it. And of course, then you can sell sponsorships and you can say, hey, you know what? You would not believe how many people are going to check out this game tonight featuring the Bulls and the Dallas Mavericks, the Boston Celtics and the Lakers. So it started to grow, and TV money. And all of a sudden, these players became like, bigger than life. They didn't need last names. Magic, hey, there's MJ. Yeah, and before you knew it, there were so many people who said, I got to check out this game. And so the popularity of the sport really triggered it.
And it's interesting you mentioned all those markets. And actually, today the NBA released a new app that their old app is done, and they came out with a new global app as they're trying to mesh the global game more. And I just want to point out to the viewers here that you'd be very surprised that other than China, which is the second biggest market of the league, the Philippines is the third. And then you have countries like Australia, Brazil, as you mentioned, Mexico, Spain, which has great players in their own right. So
how about
it really
India?
is a global game. India as well.
Yeah. I'm telling you what, there is, and the great thing about this is when a sport becomes so popular, you're going to get men and women coaching these kids. And that was the thing about Canada. When I arrived in Canada in 1998, the Raptors were just in their infancy. They came as an expansion team, and all of a sudden, and Vince Carter deserves a lot of credit because Vince put basketball on the map in Canada without any question. I mean, he was just dunking, abusing players left and right, 360s, windmills, tomahawk dunks, you name it. He was getting after it. So, I mean, when I look at the growth of basketball in Canada, I'm thinking, well, the optics said, I got to catch what Vince Carter's doing. This Raptor team, they're young, they're hungry. And all of a sudden, these kids said, hey, Dad, can we go to a game? Hey, Dad, can you buy me a basketball? Hey, Mom, can you take me, to watch this team play? Hey, Mom, there's a high school game down the road. Hey, Dad. And all of a sudden, parents are getting involved and they sign their kids up for basketball. They're taking their kids to clinics in the summer featuring Raptor players. The colleges, they're sending coaches to a Raptor practice to take notes on what we're running, what sets, and all these things kind of mushroom.
Yeah. I mean, all it takes is really one player to change the direction of an organization. I guess nowadays, maybe you need 2 to 3, a lot of people would argue. But back then, there was definitely less talent stacking, as some call it. So, I mean, back to just Michael Jordan. This summer, we had the honor, and I had the pleasure, I'm sure we all did, of watching The Last Dance. It was just an absolutely phenomenal series, very iconic. And you really saw in that how MJ, his partnerships with Nike, Gatorade, they made him bigger than life. And how have you seen athletes in their just branding, social media change over time? And I know you're active on social, so I'm sure you see some of this on the waves.
Well, from a marketing standpoint, listen, everyone, and we're right now dealing with LeBron. I mean, you can't, on any given during the course of an NBA season, LeBron is out there, and LeBron has become almost a media empire into himself. And when I say media empire, I'm talking about he's got his own show on HBO. Yep. He's got commercials. He's got everything. And so this is the thing about the NBA. They market stars, and big time players really thrive in that fishbowl. You show me one superstar who doesn't like the adulation of what they're going through as a player, because this thing goes quickly. Let me tell you what, even if you're lucky to play in the league 10 to 13 years, truth of the matter is it seems like 13 minutes. And the reason when I talk to players who have been in the league for a decade and then they're ready to retire, they always tell me, they go, Chuck, you would not believe how quickly time goes. I can't believe it seemed like yesterday I just came in the league. And what happens is, especially when you win, you start and then all of a sudden game 3 turns into game 12 and game 12 turns into game 23 and game 23 turns into game 39. I mean, it goes by because you're playing boom, boom, boom. And when you're not playing, you're resting your body, you're crashing at home, you got a nutritionist, you got to stay hydrated. You know, occasionally you're going out, then you're on an airplane, you're in a hotel, and you look and all of a sudden, you know, you're at the All-Star break. And then all of a sudden, a blink of an eye, you roll over in bed one day and you realize, I'm 34 years old. I've been in the league, 12 years, 13 years. I got to start thinking about life after basketball. So it goes so quickly. But I think the players, this is a great, great lifestyle. I mean, they've been playing since they were kids, and a very small, minuscule percentage of less than 1% gets to put on an NBA uniform. So it's a dream. It really is.
All I can say is just wow. Like, what a absolutely fantastic conversation. I appreciate you guys all for tuning into episode 5, part 1, my interview with Chuck Swirsky, the radio play-by-play broadcaster of the Chicago Bulls. In part 2, we'll cover the art of radio broadcasting. We'll talk a little bit about the Bulls and their offseason and really what to look forward to as we move into the future in this 2021 NBA season. And we'll end off with some quick hits in which Chuck will tell some hilarious stories about some of his favorite memories on all levels of basketball, as well as the best stadiums he's called games in. And some of those don't even exist anymore. So it's a really interesting thing to hear. And we'll really end off the episode with Chuck providing some absolutely phenomenal wisdom to anyone listening, just about life in general. So very inspiring, very great conversation. I look forward to releasing part 2 next week. Have a nice weekend, everybody.